They didn't die. They're still out there somewhere, breathing, eating, living their life. And yet you feel it. That hollow, aching thing in your chest that you don't have a name for. That specific weight that sits on you in quiet moments when no one's watching. When you let yourself think about it, you've tried to explain it to people, and they look at you with this expression, not quite understanding, not quite dismissing you, but searching for the right thing to say. Because what do you call this? There's no funeral, no obituary, no casserole left at the door. Just a person who used to be yours, who is still, technically, alive, and a grief that the world has no ceremony for. What you're feeling has a name. Psychologist Pauline Boss spent decades studying it. She called it ambiguous loss, and she first encountered it in the families of soldiers missing in action, men who never came home, women who didn't know if they were widows. She noticed something. These families were grieving just as intensely as families who had lost someone to death, sometimes more, because at least death has an ending. At least death has a ritual. This had nothing, just an open question that never closed. Boss eventually realized this wasn't just about soldiers. This was about anyone who had lost a person without losing their heartbeat. And she said something that I want you to hear. Ambiguous loss is the most difficult grief precisely because there is no closure. The two types. There are two forms of this kind of loss. The first is when someone is physically absent but psychologically present. They're gone, but your mind won't let them be. Maybe they left. Maybe they disappeared. Maybe the relationship ended and you still catch yourself reaching for the phone to tell them something and then remembering. The second is harder to explain to people who haven't lived it. It's when someone is physically present but psychologically gone. They're right there in front of you. You can touch them. You can hear them. But whoever they used to be, the person you loved, the parent who knew your name, the partner who looked at you like you were the whole world, that person is gone. This is the grief of dementia, of addiction, of watching someone you love disappear into a version of themselves you don't recognize. It is the grief of estrangement from a parent who is still sending Christmas cards. It is the grief of a friendship that quietly died while both of you were still alive. You are mourning someone who could still, theoretically, come back. And that hope, that small, stubborn, exhausting hope, is exactly what makes this kind of grief almost impossible to process. Why it's so hard. Here is what no one tells you about grieving someone who is still alive. Your brain doesn't know what to do with it. When someone dies, the brain begins a process. It's painful, deeply, physically painful, but it knows the shape of what it's doing. It's updating its internal map of the world to account for an absence that won't change. Ambiguous loss doesn't let the brain do that, because the loss isn't confirmed, because it might reverse, because every time you start to accept it, something reminds you it's not over. A birthday notification, someone mentioning their name, a brief moment where they seem like themselves again before they don't. And so your brain stays in a state of suspension, half grieving, half waiting. Neurologically, it's processing the same stress signals as a death, but it can never complete the cycle. Kenneth Doka, a grief researcher, gave this another name. Disenfranchised grief. Grief that society doesn't validate. Grief that doesn't fit the rules. In most cultures, we have carefully constructed rituals for death. A funeral, a burial, a gathering. Ways of telling the mind, this is real, this happened. You are allowed to mourn. Ambiguous loss comes with none of that. So the grief has nowhere to land. People around you don't know what to say. Some say nothing. Some say things like, well, at least they're still alive, or maybe you'll reconnect someday, or you should try talking to them. And those words, however well-meaning, do something quietly devastating. They take your grief, and they make you feel like it isn't real. The specific shapes. Let me name some of the specific ways this shows up, because you might not have seen yourself in the word grief before. Estrangement. From a parent, a sibling, a child, a relationship that broke along a fault line, religion, politics, a wound that couldn't be healed, or sometimes, for your own protection. You made the right choice. You know you made the right choice, and you are still grieving. You are grieving the parent they never quite managed to be, the version of that relationship you wanted your whole life, the future, the holidays, the phone calls, the ordinary moments that now exist only as a kind of shadow. Addiction. Watching someone you love lose themselves to a substance is one of the cruelest forms of this grief. They are there, they are not there. You love them, you cannot save them, and every time they seem to come back to you, some part of you holds the joy at arm's length, because you know how quickly it can disappear again. Dementia. To watch a parent or partner not recognize your face, to sit across from someone and feel viscerally their absence in a body that is still warm, still breathing, still in the room with you. Grief researchers describe this as mourning in slow motion, a loss that keeps happening, that strips away pieces one by one. A relationship that faded. Sometimes it's quieter than any of that. A friendship that just dissolved. A romantic relationship that ended badly or ended too slowly or never quite ended at all. Someone who is out there living their life while you carry the ghost of what you were to each other. All of these are the same category of pain. All of them are grief without a casserole, without flowers, without anyone telling you to take all the time you need. What research says about healing. Here's what Pauline Boss found after decades of working with people in ambiguous loss. The traditional model of grief, the one that tells you to accept, to find closure, to move on, doesn't work here, because closure, she says, is often a myth. What she found instead is that the people who did best weren't the ones who achieved resolution. They were the ones who learned to hold the ambiguity, to live inside the uncertainty without being destroyed by it. That means grieving what was lost, while acknowledging what might still be possible. It means holding two things that feel contradictory. I love this person, and this relationship, in its old form, is gone. It means building a new relationship with what remains, whether that's a diminished version of them, a memory, or the honest acceptance that some things don't come back. It also means giving yourself the ritual that the world didn't offer you. You don't need a funeral to mark a loss. You can write a letter you'll never send. You can light a candle on the anniversary of when things changed. You can tell someone, anyone, I am grieving this, and I need you to know it's real. Because legitimizing your own grief is often the first and hardest step. The world doesn't have a card for what you're going through. That doesn't mean you don't get to feel it. The permission. I want to say something to you directly. If you have been carrying a loss that you haven't let yourself fully grieve because the person is still alive, you are allowed to grieve this. You are allowed to mourn the version of that relationship that no longer exists. You are allowed to mourn the person they used to be, or the person you hoped they'd become, or the future you had quietly planned in the back of your mind. You don't need their death certificate. You don't need anyone else to understand. You don't need it to be over to start mourning what it became. Pauline Boss wrote something I've never been able to forget. She said, "Loss doesn't always come with a body to bury. And if nobody has said this to you yet, I'm saying it now. What you are carrying is real. The grief is real. The love underneath the grief is real. And you deserve the space to feel all of it. There is a specific kind of strength in grieving something the world won't name for you, in sitting with a loss that has no clean ending, in loving someone even while you mourn them. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you someone who loved deeply enough to feel the shape of what's missing. That is not a small thing. If this resonated with you, stay. There's more.